All right, now we are in our segment generations reflecting on lifestyles, and tonight's reflection touches on something that I think becomes increasingly important as people move through their 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond. What do we do with our past mistakes? Do we try to forget them? Do we try to bury them? Do we pretend they never happened? Or do we somehow learn to carry them without letting them define us? And that's exactly what today's creator is exploring. So, today we're reacting to a video by Jeff Nuppel from the channel Gen Existence, and the video is called "Why Owning Your Past Feels Like Admitting You're a Loser." So we're going to listen a brief introduction by Jeff, and we're going to be reflecting about his thoughts.
Have you ever looked back at your life and thought, I wasted years, I should have known better? And when someone tells you to just own it, it doesn't feel empowering. It feels like agreeing that at some level, you're a loser. I'm making this video because someone left a comment that captured this perfectly. He asked, but is it better to think of your former self as a different person when you realize his decisions and neglect put you in a difficult place and that he was blind to your priorities? And I replied, I don't think of him as a different person. I think of him as me with less awareness. If I turn him into someone else, I avoid owning it. But if I condemn him, I get stuck in shame. Integration is recognizing I did the best with the awareness I had at that time, and now I see more. And
Alright, so the central argument of the video is surprisingly simple, that your younger self may have made mistakes, but he's still you. And trying to completely separate yourself from that person is often counterproductive, because the same person who made those mistakes is also the person who earned the wisdom you have today. And I think that's a very powerful observation. One of the most useful distinctions he makes is between guilt and shame. And guilt says something that, such as, I did something wrong, right? While shame says, I am wrong. And psychologically, those are very different experiences, because guilt allows learning. You recognize a mistake, you correct it, and you grow as a result. But shame often freezes people, because if you believe you're fundamentally broken, what exactly are you supposed to build from there? And I think many people confuse these two things. They think self criticism automatically creates growth, but excessive shame often creates the opposite. It creates paralysis. And one reason I think this video resonates particularly strongly with Generation X is because Gen X grew up in a culture that often emphasized self reliance, toughness, personal responsibility, and not complaining. Many Gen X men, especially, were not encouraged to spend much time discussing emotions, regret, vulnerability, or psychological wounds. The message was often figure it out yourself, move on, keep going, don't dwell on it. And there are strengths in that mindset, but there are also limitations because unresolved experiences don't always disappear simply because we stop talking about them. And one thing I find interesting about 80s culture is that it was full of stories about reinvention. And artists constantly reinvented themselves with new looks, new sounds, new identities. Think about um, David Bowie, Tina Turner, Madonna, or Peter Gabriel. They evolved dramatically. But here's something interesting. They didn't erase their previous selves. They built on them. Each version became part of the next version. And psychologically, that's exactly what this video is describing. One of the strongest ideas in the video is the warning against trying to exile your former self. And many people attempt this. They look back at an earlier version of themselves and think, I don't even recognize that person. I hate who I was. That's not me anymore. But Jeff Nupel argues something very important. That person still exists inside your story. And if you completely reject him, you also reject the lessons he paid for. And this is where I think the 90s add another interesting layer, as the 90s became increasingly interested in self-awareness, therapy, personal growth, and emotional honesty. Compared to previous generations, people started talking more openly about topics such as family dynamics, personal struggles, identity, and emotional development. And many of the best songs of the 90s reflected exactly that. They weren't simply saying, everything is great. They often explored confusion, regret, uncertainty, and self-examination, self-exploration. And one point from the video that I particularly liked is the idea that starting over in midlife is not starting from zero. And that's something many people forget, because modern culture often glorifies youth. It celebrates the person who succeeds at 22, 23, or 30, but life doesn't work that way for everyone. Sometimes wisdom arrives later. Sometimes confidence arrives later. Sometimes clarity arrives later. And the creator argues that somebody in midlife possesses something a younger version didn't. That is the earned experience, right? And that's true. A 50 years old starting a new chapter is not the same as a 20-year-old starting one. They may have less time, but they often have far better judgment. And this is where the idea connects gracefully, I think, with what we often discuss on this show, that is positive nostalgia or conscious nostalgia. Because positive nostalgia is not pretending the past was perfect. It's not saying those were the good old days, everything was better. But positive nostalgia says, what can I learn from my past that still has value today? What can I take from the past that is healthy, that is helpful, and that I can still use now? And that's remarkably similar to the message of this video. that encourages everyone uh, to. It tells everyone that you don't discard the past and you don't live inside it either, but you learn from the past. And one of the interesting lines from uh, Jeff Nupel in this video is the idea that growth is not the problem to solve once and forever. It's a kind of ongoing conversation. And that feels much more realistic, right? Because nobody reaches a magical point where all mistakes are resolved, all regrets disappear, and all doubts vanish. Life doesn't work that way, unfortunately. But we can develop a healthier relationship with our own history. So perhaps the biggest lesson from this video is this. The goal is not to become someone completely different. The goal is to become someone more aware. The younger version of you may have been less experienced, less patient, less informed, less mature. But he was also the person who made today's wisdom possible. And perhaps maturity is not learning how to erase that former self, but learning how to thank him or thank her for the lessons while no longer repeating the mistakes. Because at the end of the day, your past is not your prison, it's your education. And when it's viewed that way, every chapter of life becomes useful. Alright, everyone, that's been tonight's Generations Reflecting on Lifestyle, featuring Jeff Nupel from the YouTube channel Chen Existence. I will leave you the links down below. You can subscribe to his channel. He's a mental health professional colleague, and his channel addresses a lot of not only interesting but necessary topics for Gen X and older generations especially, but very helpful and useful for millennials or late millennials as well. So the video is called Why Owning Your Past Feels Like Admitting You're a Loser. Search for it and watch it completely and subscribe to his channel. It's a great content by a wise and empathetic person. And after this brief recess, we are coming back with our next segment, Tools for These Times.